You saw that plate in the thumbnail. Cheap food that somehow tasted rich. That was no accident, and it was no lie. I fed myself for about $1 a day once. A grown man a whole month on what most folks throw in the trash. And the meals didn't taste poor. They tasted like somebody loved me. I learned that at my grandmother's stove in 1954 in a narrow kitchen in Scranton, Pennsylvania, with one window that wouldn't shut all the way. She had a string of fat little tricks no cookbook ever bothered to print. And by the end of this, I'm going to hand you the one she saved for last. A peasant dish so old it has a name that means cooked water. It cost almost nothing, and it fed people who had nothing. If you're cooking for one tonight or for two on a check that runs out before the month does, sit with me a minute. This is for you. I want you to picture her hands first. My grandmother's hands were red and cracked at the knuckles, and they never stopped moving. She used to say the same thing every time she lit the burner. She'd say, "We're not poor, we're just early." I didn't know what it meant. I thought she meant we'd be rich someday. Now I'm 73 years old, and I finally understand. She meant we ate the old way, the way everyone used to eat, before food got fast and people got soft. She had no money. My grandfather was gone, and she raised 3 children and 1 stray grandson on what she made taking and sewing. And not one of us ever sat down to a sad plate. That's the part nobody believes. They think cheap food has to taste like punishment. She proved it didn't 400 times a year with an onion and a little fat and a hot pan. So let me start there, because this is the first trick and it's the one everything else stands on. She never ever threw an onion into a coal pot, never. She'd put a spoon of fat in the pan, lard mostly, sometimes bacon grease from the can on the back of the stove, and she'd let it get hot enough to shimmer. Then the onion went in, and she'd cook it slow until it turned the color of an old penny. Deep brown, almost too far. The smell would fill that whole apartment and bring my uncles in off the porch before she'd even decided what supper was. That brown is free. That's what I need you to hear. Browning an onion costs you nothing but time and a little patience, and it puts a richness into a dish that poor people used to lean on like a crutch. There's real science under it now. Sugar's breaking down into hundreds of new flavors, but she didn't need a word for it. She just knew a brown onion made water taste like broth, and a raw one made supper taste like nothing. So when people ask me how the cheap meals tasted rich, that's the first answer. The 1950s housewife built flavor from the bottom of the pan up instead of buying it in a jar. She started every poor supper with a brown onion and good hot fat, and the meal was halfway to wonderful before she'd spend a dime. But an onion alone won't fill a man. So let me take you to the meal that actually fed us most nights, the one I was ashamed of for 40 years. It was bread and gravy, tomato gravy she called it, though there wasn't a drop of meat in it. She'd brown her onion, then stir in a spoon of flour, and let it toast in the fat until it smelled like pie crust. That toasting matters. Raw flour tastes like paste, but flour cooked in fat turns nutty and warm. Then in went a can of tomatoes, crushed in her hand, and some water, a pinch of sugar, salt, a bay leaf if she had one. It simmered while she set the table. We poured it over toasted bread, the hills nobody wanted, and we ate until we were warm. That whole pot fed 5 people. In today's money, you could make it for under $1.50. A can of tomatoes, an onion, a spoon of flour, the ends of a loaf. And I used to pray no one from school would ever find out that's what we ate. I was wrong to feel that. It took me most of my life to know it. That bread and gravy has fed Italian families and Southern families and tenement families for 200 years, and there is nothing sad about it. It's the same idea as a fine restaurant sauce. Fat, onion, a thickener, and acid, thyme. The only difference is the price tag, and the price tag was the whole point. Here's the second trick hiding inside that pot. The bay leaf and the long, quiet simmer. My grandmother believed thyme was an ingredient, and thyme was the one thing a poor woman had plenty of. She let things sit on a low flame and grow deep while she did her sewing. A cheap pot of anything given an hour on a whisper of heat stops tasting cheap. It melts together, the harsh edges go soft. That's free too. But I told you I'd take you to the harder years, and I will, because the childhood part is the easy part. The real test came when I was the one with the empty cupboard. It was the winter of 1983. I'd lost my job at the plant in November, right before the holidays, the way these things always seem to happen. I had a wife who'd already left and an apartment I could barely hold on to. And I remember standing in front of an open cupboard one night with exactly $3 and some change in my pocket, looking at a bag of dried beans, a sack of rice, and half an onion turning soft on the shelf. I almost cried right there. Not from hunger, from shame. 40 years old, and I was right back in my grandmother's narrow kitchen, except she wasn't there to make it taste like love. So I did the only thing my hands knew how to do. I lit the burner, I put in the fat, I browned that half onion until the apartment smelled like her apartment, and something in me settled. That's when I learned that beans were going to save my life. A 1-pound bag of dried beans cost me under $1 then, and it costs maybe $2 now. That single bag holds around 1,500 calories and over 100 grams of protein. Soak them overnight in plain water, and they double in size and turn tender for free while you sleep. No energy, no watching, you just leave them in the water and go to bed. The next morning I drain them, cover them in fresh water, drop in my browned onion, a bay leaf, salt, and whatever scrap of flavor I had. Some weeks that was a smoked ham bone from the butcher, which they'd nearly give away back then, 50 cents for a bone with a little meat clinging to it. The butcher knew what it was for. He didn't look at me funny. People still cook that way in 1983, barely the last of them. That pot of beans fed me for 3 days. 3 days, off $1 of beans and 50 cents a bone. The first night I ate them as soup, brothy and hot. The second day, I let them cook down thicker and ate them over rice, and the starch from the rice and the beans together made a complete protein, every building block your body needs, the way poor people across the whole world have eaten for 1,000 years without ever reading it in a study. The third day, I mashed what was left, fried it in a little fat until it got a crust, and ate it on toast. 1 pot, 3 different suppers. Nobody at that table but me, and I made it last. Now I want to talk straight to you, the ones cooking for just yourself tonight, because I know what that's like. I know the particular loneliness of it. You open the refrigerator, and there's 1 chair at the table, and it hardly seems worth the trouble to cook a real meal for 1 old body. I know some of you have hands that ache, knees that don't want to hold you at the counter for an hour, and the thought of standing there chopping and scrubbing a sink full of pots just to feed yourself feels like too much. So you eat crackers standing up, or you don't eat much at all. I've done both. So let me give you the way I cook for one now, and it leans on everything my grandmother knew. You want 1 pot, almost no knife work, and a meal that gets better as it sits so you're not cooking every single day. Beans do that. But here's the gentlest version. Take a can of beans, any beans, already cooked, you don't even soak. Take a can of tomatoes. Take 1 onion, and yes, brown it first in fat if you can, but if standing hurts, even a raw onion cut rough will do, or a spoon of dried onion from the jar. Put it all in 1 pot with a bay leaf, a little salt, and a slug of water. Let it sit on the lowest flame for half an hour while you rest in your chair. You don't have to hover. That's the whole point. That pot is 3 meals for 1 person, and it costs under $3 all in. Eat it as soup the first night. Spoon it over toast or rice the second. And on the third, here's the trick that turns it rich. Crack an egg right into the simmering pot, cover it, and let it poach in the sauce for a few minutes. That egg, 8 cents of egg, makes a poor pot of beans taste like something a cook fussed over. The yolk runs into the tomato, and it tastes like a meal somebody made for you on purpose. No standing. No chopping to speak of. 1 pot to wash. And you ate well 3 days running for the price of a fast food sandwich you'd have been ashamed to want. But I haven't told you about the eggs yet, not really, and the egg is where the old women were sneakiest of all. My grandmother could turn one egg into the centerpiece of a meal for four. She didn't fry 4 eggs. She couldn't afford 4 eggs. Instead, she'd beat one egg in a cup, and when her soup or her gravy was simmering, she'd pour that beaten egg in a thin stream while stirring, and it would bloom into soft ribbons all through the pot. One egg threaded through the whole thing, and suddenly the broth had body and richness and little tender curls of egg in every spoonful. The Italians call that stracciatella. The Chinese do the very same thing and call it egg drop. Poor people on opposite sides of the earth both figured out that one egg stirred into hot broth eats like four. That's the thing that got me when I got older and started reading and remembering. These tricks weren't hers alone. They weren't even American. They were the common inheritance of every poor kitchen that ever existed, passed hand to hand, mother to daughter for centuries. And then, somewhere in my lifetime, the chain broke. I want to tell you how it broke, because this is the part that makes me angry, and you've earned the right to be angry too. When I was a boy, the knowledge lived in every house. By the time I was a broke 40-year-old in 1983, it was getting rare. And today, most people under 50 couldn't brown an onion to save their life. And I mean that almost literally. They've never been taught. And it wasn't an accident that they weren't taught. Starting in the 1950s and rolling hard through the decades after somebody figured out there was money in convincing women that scratch cooking was beneath them, that it was drudgery, that a modern wife shouldn't waste her time browning onions and simmering beans when she could open a can or a box or a frozen tray and serve her family something that came from a factory. They sold it as freedom. They put it in every magazine and every television set, and it worked. Here's what it cost us. The cheap, rich, nourishing meal that a poor woman could make from $1 of beans got quietly replaced by a $4 box of salty powder. The skill that made poverty survivable. The skill that let my grandmother feed 5 people on nothing and have it taste like love got branded as old-fashioned and embarrassing. And once 2 generations forgot how to do it, they had no choice but to buy their flavor in a jar and their dinner in a bag for the rest of their lives at whatever price they were charged. That's the part that makes me set my jaw. They didn't just sell us convenience. They took something from us, and I spent years trying to put it back together, piece by piece. Everything I've shown you in this video, every trick my grandmother kept in that narrow Scranton kitchen, I've written down in full in a book called Grandma's Penny Table, over 100 of these meals, with the real reasoning behind each one, so you never have to guess again. It's the book I wish someone had handed me in the winter of 1983. If you want it, the link is in the description. And it costs less than a week of groceries. But here's the good news, and it's the reason I'm sitting here telling you this. They couldn't bury it completely. A few of us still carry it. And the meals are so simple that the minute someone shows you again, it comes right back like it was waiting in your hands the whole time. So let me give you a few more of her tricks fast, the small ones that turn a poor pot rich, before I take you to the one I've been saving. She kept a fat jar. Every bit of grease from cooking bacon or sausage or a Sunday roast got poured into a can on the back of the stove, and that saved fat became the start of 100 meals. It carried the flavor of the meat into dishes that had no meat at all. A pot of plain greens cooked in a spoon of bacon fat tastes like it has meat in it. That was the whole trick. A little saved fat made the poor days taste like the rich days. She brightened everything with a splash of something sour at the very end. A spoon of vinegar. The juice of a half lemon if she had it, even a little of the brine from a pickle jar. A cheap pot of beans or soup can taste flat and heavy, and a poor cook learns that a few drops of acid right before serving wakes the whole thing up. It makes your tongue think the dish is more than it is. Restaurants do it, they just don't tell you it's a nickel of vinegar doing the work. And she never wasted bread. Stale bread was not garbage in her kitchen. It was an ingredient she was glad to have. Stale bread thickens a soup, stretches a meal, and turns into its own supper. The harder and older it got, the more uses it had, which is exactly where I'm going to leave you, because stale bread is the secret behind the meal I promised you. The one I saved for last, the one that changed everything for me. I found it in the lowest winter of my whole life, and I didn't even find it on my own. I found it in an old book. After 1983, I started haunting the secondhand shops, partly for company and partly because books were a nickel. And in a box of water-stained cookbooks, I found a thin little volume of Italian peasant cooking, the real kind, the food of the contadini, the dirt-poor farmers of Tuscany, not the red checkered restaurant Italian, the actual hungry people food. And in the back, almost like it was hiding, was a recipe with a name that stopped me cold, Aquacotta. In Italian, it means cooked water. Cooked water, that was the name they gave it. The poorest people in the Tuscan hills, in the marshlands of the Maremma, going back hundreds of years. The shepherds and the charcoal burners and the field hands who had nothing made a soup so humble they named it after the one thing they always had, which was water. And here is the secret that the name hides, the secret I want to put in your hands tonight. It is one of the most satisfying, richest tasting, soul-filling meals I have ever eaten in my life, and it is made from almost literally nothing. Let me tell you how it goes, because you have everything you need for it right now. You start the way my grandmother started everything. Fat in the pan, hot, then onion, sliced, cooked down slow and brown. The poorest version is just onion. But if you have a stick of celery or a carrot going soft, in it goes, browned along with the onion until the bottom of the pot is dark and sweet. That dark bottom of the pot, that's your free broth building right there. Then a few tomatoes, fresh or from a can, crushed in, a clove of garlic if you have one, salt, and then the water, real water, several cups of it poured right in, because that is the whole genius of the dish. That water becomes broth from the brown onion and the tomato and the fat with not 1 cent of meat. A bay leaf, a little of any green you've got, even a handful of whatever leafy thing is wilting in your refrigerator, and then you let it simmer, low and slow, the way time wants it. 20 minutes, 30, while you sit down. Now here come the two things that turn cooked water into a meal that eats like a feast. The bread. You take your stale bread, the harder the better, and you lay a slice or two in the bottom of your bowl. Then you ladle the hot soup over it. That old dry bread drinks up the broth and turns soft and silky, and it thickens the whole bowl into something hearty enough to stand a spoon in. That bread is what makes it stick to your ribs. Stale bread that most folks would throw away becomes the body of the entire meal. And then the egg. While the soup simmers, you crack an egg right into the pot and let it poach gently in the broth, or you slip it over the bread in the bowl and pour the boiling soup over to cook it through. That one egg sitting on that soaked bread in that rich red broth costs you maybe 8 or 10 cents. And when you break the yolk and it runs gold into the soup, you would swear on your life that somebody spent all day and real money making this for you. Add it up. An onion, a can or two of tomatoes, stale bread you already had, an egg, a spoon of saved fat, water from the tap. You can put a deep, hot, satisfying bowl of Aquacotta in front of yourself for well under $1 a serving, and it will fill you and warm you and comfort you in a way that no $4 box of factory powder ever has or ever will. That's the meal that changed everything for me. Not because of the soup itself, though I've eaten it 1,000 times since. It changed me because of what it proved. The poorest farmers in Tuscany, with nothing but water and a few scraps, made a dish so good that it survived 500 years and crossed an ocean and found me in a second-hand bookshop in the worst winter of my life. They named it cooked water as a kind of bitter joke, and they turned that joke into something rich. If they could do that with nothing, then I had nothing to be ashamed of, and neither do you. That's when I stopped hiding what I ate. That's when the bread and gravy stopped being my secret shame and started being my pride, because I finally understood what my grandmother meant in that narrow Scranton kitchen with the window that wouldn't shut. We're not poor. We're just early. We were eating the true way, the old way, the way that outlasts every factory and every marketing man and every hard winter, the way that doesn't need money to taste like love. So if you take one thing from me tonight, let it be this. You were never the poor one. The people who forgot how to do this, who can't feed themselves without a factory's help, who pay $4 for what you can make for one, they're the poor ones. You are rich in the only way that ever mattered at a kitchen table. You know how to take nothing and make it warm. You are the kind of person who refuses to waste a heel of bread or a soft onion, who would sooner learn the old way than be sold the easy way, who feeds yourself with dignity no matter how thin the month gets. That hasn't been taken from you. It's still right there in your two hands, the same as it was in my grandmother's. Now I want to hear from you because I know you've got one of these stored away. Tell me, what was the meal that carried you through your hardest stretch? Was it bread and gravy like mine, a pot of beans on the back of the stove, something your own mother or grandmother stirred over a low flame that you haven't tasted in 40 years? Write it down for me in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from, too. I read them, and there are more of us at this table than you'd ever guess. And if any part of this felt like coming home, stay with us and subscribe, because we're keeping these meals alive here, the ones they tried to make us forget, one pot at a time. Next, I'm going to show you the 5-cent Depression dessert they called water pie, a real pie made with nothing but water that fooled a whole generation of hungry children into thinking they were eating custard. You won't believe it until you taste it. I'll save you a slice.